Hey watch friends, today we're going to check out the second offering from the Danish micro brand Nordic Marine Instruments, and this is their SØVÆRN. This one's going to be launching on June 6th of 2024 directly on their website, and I'll of course have a link down the video description if you care to check that out. As far as the pricing, this one, they have not yet announced the launch pricing. That will be coming soon. However, the retail price is stated as being $549, so I'm just guessing that it's going to probably be around $450, give or take, but we'll unpack it and see what all you get for that. As far as the basic specs, first for the warranty, this comes standard with a 2-year warranty. The case, they state at 39 millimeters. However, on my calipers, measured from roughly the 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock position, I'm getting 40.4 millimeters. And I expect that that's partly due to kind of the way that this case flares out. But of course, with crown guards and crown, it's always hard to get an exact measurement from the 3 to 9. As far as the bezel, that does step down pretty significantly, though not as much so if you go by the 39, and that's coming in at 38.8 millimeters, and that is from the 3 to 9 position. As far as the lugs, it's a nice strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug to lug is a reasonably compact 48 millimeters. As we'll talk about, it does wear a little bit flat, and we'll unpack that further. As far as the thickness, this is coming in at 10.8 millimeters, and that is inclusive of this flat sapphire crystal, which does feature inner AR coating. So it wears relatively thin in a nice compact form factor that we'll look at as we go through. As far as the movement, this is beating away with a Miyota 9015. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with that one. Excellent workhorse movement, higher beat, 28,800 beats per hour, around a 40-hour power reserve, hacking, hand winding, all that kind of good stuff, and of course automatic. The water resistance, plenty respectable for the field styling. It's coming in at 100 meters or 10 atmospheres. And then finally, the weight, size to my 6.5-inch wrist on this bracelet, it's coming in at 141.8 grams. I will say I think it wears just a hair lighter than that, though that's not really an overly heavy watch to begin with. So not one that disappears in my opinion, but at the same time I think it's pretty well balanced in suiting to the overall style. So now that we have the basic specs, let's go ahead and dive in and get a better feel for this actual model, what it's like to live with, the quirks, all those kind of good things. First, for the colors. This is available in a variety of different color options. There's the moss green that we're looking at today. There's additionally a gray version, a black version, a light blue version, a tan version that's actually a full lume, as well as there's another black version that features a DLC case and bracelet, so that gives you kind of that stealth out look. As far as the finishing, the texture on the dials is going to be what I would describe as like a fine sand. We've seen a lot of other sands before. This is not one of the more pebbly style. This is that real fine granuled sand, which kind of gives like a satiny sheen to it, especially depending on the way the light's hitting it. This particular color is just a beautiful moss green coloration. It's unique, and I'm hoping that it comes across as far as depending on the settings here of the camera, as well as your monitor. But this color and shade of green, it really is a pretty cool shade here. It is reminiscent of moss. It's to me kind of somewhere between like a true what I would call moss as well as like an olive drab green, which does give it a unique look. The logo at the 12 o'clock position, as you can see, they have that shield that is applied, very prominent. You know, not overly so, it's not too large or anything like that, but it really pops off that dial, especially with this being a sandwich structure that we'll look at as we go through. The printing, you can see directly below that, they have the Nordic Marine Instruments, and then down at the 6 o'clock position, you can see the model name as well as the water resistance. And of course, you do have a nice accent color of orange, which I think suits this green color well for that field styling. As far as the date window, you can see at the 6 o'clock position, this does have a built-in frame, so actually cut into the dial, frame date window with a color-matched date wheel, really nicely incorporated. I think that looks great in this color, and the shading is perfectly spot on for that, so excellent job there. The chapter ring out on the perimeter, you can see that that's like milled down in, has a nice little like border lip around there that again is all subtly done. So they didn't go with like a polished accent or anything like that, which I think would be a little bit too blingy for this style. I think this really suits the field styling well. But additionally though, as we'll talk about, it has excellent legibility. You can see that they did go with a mix of hashes as well as dots here. So in your 5-minute increments, you have dots, and then in between you have hashes. One of the things that's nice too though with the dots, you can see they incorporated that color accent as well at your 12, 3, 6, and 9 position, which again I think is in keeping with the field styling, and I think that orange does suit this color well. Shifting over to the hardware, the handset on this is going to be fully polished for all 3 hands. The hour and minute hand are what I would describe as probably being like a paddle, though you could also call it kind of a blunted sword, but it's that styling for it. Obviously, it does have loom applied, and we'll check that out here momentarily. Shifting over to the second hand, you can see the counterbalance is what I describe as kind of like an anchor counterbalance, so that's a pretty cool touch. Then as you move out towards, it does have like a pill-style lollipop, and then again, you have that color accent. So that's well incorporated, nice subtle touches throughout. Doesn't really scream at you as far as those color accents, but really does add not only to visual appeal, but also to legibility. So that's nicely done there as well. As far as the markers themselves, in this case, as I already alluded to earlier, this is a sandwich dowel, and accordingly, those are cut and kind of milled in there. That's going to be, again, like pill or baton styling for that as well. It is all the way around, so down at the 6 o'clock, even with that frame date window, you can see there is just a little one there that we'll check out in the loom here momentarily where it's more prominent. And then at the 12 o'clock, to help for indexing, you can see that it does have the double there. So I think that's all nicely laid out. As far as the loom itself, as you can see here, the loom is pretty strongly applied. I mean, especially for being a field style watch, field doesn't necessarily have to be as strong as a dive watch, but for me, I think many of us are loomaholics, so the more the better. And this actually, performs nicely. It has a good application of it. I haven't had any complaints or issues there, and I think it looks nice as well. Shifting over to the bezel, as we already looked at, the bezel on this is step back or set back, depending on what part of the case you're looking from as to how pronounced it is, but it is at least a little bit of a step back. This is a fixed bezel, and it does have, as you can see, an undercut for it. It's more subtle than some of them are, but it's more like a chamfer cut under there, but it does give kind of a nice visual effect. Almost gives you like a rotating bezel would as far as where it seems like it has that separation, but nicely incorporated. As far as the finishing, you can see that this goes with a real cool sandwich here. So you have that polish underneath, then you have your brushing, then you go back to polish, then you go back to brushing. So I like the fact that they did that alternating for that. I think that looks aesthetically pleasing, and I think it really breaks things up and adds some of the accents to the lines of this as well. So it really accentuates that. As far as the shape here, you can see that this does have a nice slope to it, which really just seamlessly bridges up to that crystal. And again, I think that's well done there as well. Shifting over to the case on this is pretty slick. As you can see here, it is a relatively flat profile. So if you orient yourself off of the case back, you can see that this is relatively flat. However, visually, if you just glance at it, it seems like it has a pretty good curvature to it. And part of that, if you notice, there's kind of an elliptical chamfer cut down underneath with that polish accent, as well as the brushing follows that flow. So that, to me, visually gives the appearance or the feel of having some curvature, but it is a relatively flat case, and that does have some wear characteristics, as we'll talk about as we go through here. As far as the finishing, just like with the bezel, you can see that this nicely incorporates with a mix of polish, then brush, then polish again. So again, with that sandwich kind of cut there, which I think with those chamfers does make this visually appealing. And then I also like the fact that with that brushing, not only is it running horizontal, so the length of the case, but I like the fact that that visually slims that out. So not just the curvature that adds, but it also does, I think, slim down the overall look and give it an even more svelte appearance. When we shift over to the lugs, you can see the lugs are, I think, well proportioned to the case and to the styling. You can see that there are chamfer cuts again, so we've got that outside we already saw, but then there's an inner chamfer cut, and again, this mixes up with that brush and polish accent there. Shifting over in between, you can see it is curved lugs in between, and then over on the crown side, you can see that there is an integrated crown guard as well, and that is a pretty prominent integrated crown guard, though it doesn't protrude past, nor does it get in the way or anything like that. It's pretty smoothly kind of tapered as it goes to the crown itself. As far as the crown, this is a screw-in crown, and it's coming in at 6.3 millimeters. As you can see here, it does have a traditional coin edge finish running the full length of that. Very easy to grip a hold of, no complaints there. The finishing on this is going to be brushed all the way around. Again, I think that keeps with the more totally or sport style while still having those polish that gives you the dressier accent. So I think it walks that line nicely. And then as you can see, it does carry over with that shield logo that's actually milled in there as well. Shifting over to the case back. The case back on this is a screw-in construction, so that's part of what gives it good water resistance as well as makes it easy if you need access. The finishing on this is going to be linear brushing in the middle of the case and then polished on the exterior edge of that. As far as the text, you can see it just has a relatively simple, clean text. This is a pretty basic case back, and it's not something I'm complaining about. I think it's nicely done, and I think it is fitting for the style. Additionally, though, you can see that this is a pretty thin case back, which that's part of what helps this with having the flatter profile. That makes it nice in that this does still nest pretty nicely, and the lugs do drop pretty well flush with the case back. As far as the bracelet, As you can see on my 6.5-inch wrist here, it fits pretty nicely overall. There are some quirks with it, and we'll unpack those. And the main thing is going to be the flat profile. As you can see here at the 12 o'clock position, sometimes, especially depending on how it shifts, this can happen with all of them, but with a flatter profile, it can look like it has overhang even when it doesn't. So that's just something visually that can occur there and something to be aware of, though it fits just fine, and I think it could go a little smaller than my wrist as well. This does feature female end links, and it is going to be a taper from 20 millimeters at the lugs down to 16 millimeters at the clasp. With that female end link, you can see because of the flatter profile, it does have a pretty decent drop, and we'll come back to that as far as the way that works out there. The link construction is going to be a traditional 3-link configuration, and it is full brushing all the way down. I'm actually really glad that they did that. Unless they did just very minor chamfers on the edge, I think it would have been too much polish for the styling of this watch. On the back, there are quick release spring bars, so that makes it nice and easy to change this around if you want to throw on a strap or anything along those lines. As far as the inside of this does have, so there's not a ton of taper, there's no real chamfer or anything, but it does have a surprisingly smooth for the inside of this, so that makes it pretty comfortable on wrist as far as the overall finishing there. And then this is held in with screws, so again, it's going to be easy to get this sized up initially. Do make sure that you put a drop of Loctite on there. And if you don't already have one, I'll have a link down in the video description for a quality screwdriver, as well as a link to a how-to to not strip out the screws or anything when you change those around. As far as the articulation, for being a 3-link style watch, I think the articulation's pretty good. This does have one quirk, and that is that the quick release spring bars are fairly prominent, and with the way that this drops down, the link does get caught on that, so it doesn't have a lot of undercase articulation where you can't actually fold this even close to flat with the case back. However, I haven't found that to be problematic or impacting the comfort, and it does, at least on my size wrist, still have plenty of room to be able to drop freely and to benefit from that female end link. As far as the clasp, this is a traditional double pusher style clasp. It's going to be, again, principally brushing. It does have their signature on the exterior, as well as it does have polished chamfer cuts on the outside. When you push open those double pushers, you can see there's a milled bridge on the inside. But one of the biggest things is going to be that this does include a quick release, toolless micro adjust clasp. So that's excellent there. As you can see, they put, I believe that translates to pressure, but that is in Danish there. So that's a nice little nod and touch to their home lineage there. So that's pretty slick. But the biggest thing is this will ratchet out, or actually does slide out rather, and it does ratchet back in. So that is a nice functional impact there. So you're going to be able to, on the fly, get this adjusted as your wrist swells throughout the day and those kind of things. Always something that's very welcome for me. So that should hopefully give you a better feel for this watch itself. But let's go ahead and wrap things up with, I want to first look at some comps, and then we'll look at my view of the positives, critiques, as well as summary. First, for a comp here, we have the RZE, it says right, so this is the original, but the RZE Resolute. This one is a 40 millimeter, so it's going to be, as you can see, relatively similar sizing. I do think the dial reads a little bit smaller on this, which is in keeping with their stated 39 millimeters. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this in, not only the field styling of this, and kind of give you an idea there as far as the aesthetics, but additionally, though, this is actually a partner of the Nordic Marine with RZE, so they work with the founder there for logistics and other pieces as well. So that's a cool collaboration there. This one next is a Zelos Aurora. This is the 38 millimeter. And this just gives you an idea again as far as sizing here. You can see this does wear a little bit, or read a little bit larger than that one. So again, I think their stated 39 is probably pretty well in keeping, more so than the 40.5 that I measured on calipers here. But that gives you an idea there as far as sizing. And then finally, just bringing in another kind of sporty-ish watch here. This one certainly is much more field-leaning, but this is another Danish brand as well. This is the Henry Archer Vesterhof, and I, of course, do have reviews of all these watches we've looked at here. But you can see this one is, again, 40 millimeters, and I think wears a little bit larger as far as sizing for the read there. But another fantastic. I've been really impressed with what these Danes are doing here with watches, coming out strongly. All right, so now let's go ahead and wrap things up with my view of the positives, critiques, as well as the summary. First, for the positives. In keeping with the field styling of this, I think the legibility is spot on, at least on this particular color. Certainly some of these other ones might not be as legible, the light blue, the gray, some different ones. This one, though, has a pretty good amount of contrast, probably actually more so in real world than comes across on camera, and then nice visible chapter ring, all those kind of good things. No problems whatsoever with legibility, and it's exactly what you'd want in a field watch. This moss green color, as I've already talked about, I think it's a great coloration. I think it really isn't fitting with the field styling, but it's also just a visually pleasing color. It's a nice shade of green to my eye, especially in person. Again, I don't know how it's going to render on your screen, but I really like the look of this one. It's to my taste. Finishing on this is pretty excellent, especially at the price point, hopefully the 450 to 550 kind of territory here. I think it's plenty well spot on. The brushing is clean, the polishing's clean, no real complaints there as far as the finishing. So I definitely think you get a nice, respectable watch for the money. Comfort, as we already talked about, the bracelet, despite the fact that this is a 3-link, it still has pretty good articulation, nice smooth on the inside, having that toeless micro adjust clasp. That's always a big plus in my book and allows you to get that dialed in to your needs. And then same thing with kind of the weight balancing, all those pieces. No real complaints there for comfort. It's been nice to wear. But what about some critiques? I really only have one primary area for critiques, but it does have multiple facets to it. As I've already alluded to numerous times, I do think that this case wears relatively flat. And there are several pieces that come with that. So first, the profile, as I already talked about earlier. At the 12 o'clock position, at least on my wrist, this does tend to look like it has an overhang even when it doesn't. Sometimes just the way that it sits on the wrist, depending on how it's nested or not. So it actually nests quite nicely, especially with that tucked in case back, but it is something to be aware of. I've noticed it. It's not necessarily my favorite thing. The biggest thing, though, that I'm not real crazy about is because the lugs themselves are relatively flat, so they don't have a ton of drop on the top. As you can see, they do drop, but they do read relatively flat. What ends up happening there is when you combine that with this fitted end link and a female end link at that, what ends up happening is that kind of drops down in. So it creates that ledge effect that I've never been crazy about. So you get kind of that step there. It reads a little bit flat for this, making it feel a little bit chunkier and a little bit longer than it actually is. But then that drop though, I always think that looks kind of unrefined. There's numerous watches with female end links that this happens for, but that's something that for me is always a little bit of a pet peeve. And then finally, the quick release spring bars, these are pretty darn prominent. As we saw, they do completely block the first link there. But with these, I have not personally had a hot spot. However, depending on your wrist shape, depending on how tight you wear it and those kind of things, because these protrude the way they do, they don't come particularly proud of the case back, but that is something I could see as being a potential hot spot point. So even though it hasn't impacted me, it is something that I wanted you to be aware of. If that does happen, it's always easy to change these around with traditional spring bars, so I wouldn't let that deter you. That's not too big of a deal. So where does that leave us? For overall summary, my personal view is this is, I think, another very impressive offering, especially for being the second from the brand. It's clear that from Watch Bandit experience, as well as working with RZE and otherwise, that they really knew what they were doing when they came into this. I think they've been coming out very strong with their first 2 offerings, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the brand has in store for the future. Overall, I think you get a nice, sharply designed, as well as refined packaging, especially at the price point. So I hope this has been helpful for you. If you did like it, do tap that like button. If you haven't already done so, smash that subscribe button. Finally, drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. Do you like the overall watch? If you do, which color's your favorite? What do you think of this green? All that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.